What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the Gotham Knights previews that are hitting the internet. Now, previews, not reviews. I've looked at about 6, I would say, previews ranging from IGN to PlayStation.com to The Verge, Video Game Chronicles. I'm trying to think of all of them. I watched a couple others as well, and quite a few different things being said. Honestly, I'll give journalists a little bit of credit in this little event here, because some of them are taking different approaches to what they're saying in their previews. I think IGN's honestly is kind of the most robust. I read a couple of them that were kind of simple, and so let's kind of go over some of the major themes I would say we got from these previews, and we can talk about, you know, if they're worrisome things or not. The biggest one that I guess let's go over the umbrella kind of statements. All right, this was, from what I can tell, like a 3-hour thing that they were able to do, and it was split up in a couple different sections of the game. They kind of got to do, sounds like the beginning of the game, the one that we saw from the IGN first. It seems like they did that again. They fought Harley again. Okay, but again, as in we've seen that before, not they've played it before. They've actually, up until this point, nobody's been able to actually touch Gotham Knights. The IGN first stuff, that was all provided by Warner Bros. Montreal. That was not IGN actually playing the game with a controller. So they actually got to do it for the first time. Then there was a couple, open world things that had to do with Harley, and they kind of called it there. So 3 hours, couple segments. It does seem like nothing, absolutely nothing in terms of the main story, like nothing to further evaluate if the main story is going to be good, nothing to further evaluate anything on the Court of Owls. They kind of stayed off of that, which you could say, is it worrisome that nobody's really, gotten to do anything with the story yet? Yeah, a little. Or are they doing it because they're being really protective of the story? I mean, I would kind of lean that way, right? Because maybe a Batman thing, or maybe just they want to keep the Court of Owls hidden as much as possible. One of those, all right? Now, some of these previews, again, pretty lackluster, pretty simple, kind of just talking about, yeah, you play as the 4 of them, kind of described their play styles. I mean, we've kind of seen it at this point. Still, from what I've seen, very, very limited Robin gameplay. Very limited. We do get to see a little bit of his fighting, and he does look very cool. His technology, where he can kind of make a holographic clone of himself, that looks very cool. But beyond that, I mean, we get a little bit more of everybody else, which, again, we've already seen them to a fair extent, and they all look solid. Now, again, a theme that I saw through several of these previews is, because they broke the game up into segments, nobody really felt like they were experiencing this journey with the knight, and a big part of this game is your play style and how you actually customize your knight, because all 4 of them can be played in different ways. Batgirl, you can make her a certain kind of class of character, or you can make her a different one, and it depends on how you go about that throughout the game. So by splitting it up and kind of like splintering it, right, and putting them into different circumstances, nobody really got that sense. But I would say kind of overwhelmingly, combat, in terms of like the actual movements and how it feels, I think most of them were pretty happy with it. One thing I did see over and over again, which is very concerning, to be honest with you, is repetitiveness. Same enemies over and over, same fighting techniques that you can use to take out these enemies. I saw, I think, 2 different previews where they said that they themselves changed their fighting style just to make it like exciting. Like the enemies could be taken out the exact same way no matter what, so they changed how they fight just to kind of liven it up a little bit. That's not great to hear, especially in a game where the customization of your character is so important, how you fight is so important. But if the enemies are too repetitive or it's too boring to fight them, that kind of will ruin the whole game from a gameplay perspective. I know I saw a couple people talk specifically about like the brutes, the ones with the shields, that you just constantly break their shield stuff. It gets very repetitive, gets very boring very, very quickly. So that's not great. That's not great to hear. And going along that gameplay kind of co-op even, let's introduce that element. I did see people talk about, it seems like a game very much so you can play single player, you'd have no problem with it. Multiplayer, you'd have no problem with it. It does seem, as now people have actually touched the game, that they made it so that you could do either or, and it wouldn't suffer for it. Although I did see, I think it was Kind of Funny's preview, where she said she feels that if you play cooperatively, you go through enemies like nothing. Like it's so much easier to go through enemies, but that doesn't, and she says it, and I was thinking the same thing, but she says, just because you can go through things faster doesn't mean it's better. And that is true. I mean, there is if you're facing, say, 5 enemies and it's by yourself versus 5 enemies with another person, just because you can get through them in, say, half the time or even a quarter of the time or whatever, that doesn't mean the fight is more rewarding, right? So we'll have to see kind of how that plays out. I've talked about how I think co-op is a kind of a low-key savior of this game. Obviously, co-op can be really fun when you're playing a game through with your friend, right? It changes the dynamic of that game versus just playing it alone. But things that kind of happen behind the scenes and yet right in front of our eyes is that balancing, right? The game still has to be designed for multiplayer and has to be balanced for it because, yeah, if you're just simply going through enemies at triple the speed, that doesn't necessarily mean it's better, right? And so, those are kind of those small tweaks, like engineering-wise or, the coding of the game. They really got to make sure that's good, and I've seen mixed things so far. Visuals, people actually were pretty impressed. I know IGN focused on visuals quite a bit as well. They talked about Gotham. They talked about when you're kind of moving around Gotham that it looks, pretty darn good. So that's good, right? Visuals have always been a point of contention for a lot of people. Not a lot on, again, and I've talked about the main story or the even cutscenes regarding that. IGN focused on one between Nightwing and Red Hood and likened it to Guardians of the Galaxy, more like emotional kind of depth. They show the cutscene, and it's pretty okay. I really don't know if I'm sold on any of their voice acting as of right now, and it's probably just because I've seen them, again, splintered throughout. I haven't seen something very consistent because it seems like they're kind of all over the place, but we'll see how that is, when the game comes out. So, here's the deal. Here's what I want to say also from kind of an observing standpoint and seeing previews being done on other games, in the past. It's a little worrisome what we've seen because they continue to hide things, all right? And hiding things is not always a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, all right? Or I guess it's always a bad thing. But they continue to hide things, and normally when previews are mixed or if previews are outright bad, that doesn't mean the greatest thing when it comes to the final verdict of the game. Now, ultimately, by the way, if you don't care what game journalists say, and to an extent I don't either, then that's completely, none of this actually matters. These are, again, for me, 6 individuals that had opinions on a game. I'm not a big fan of gaming journalists in the first place. Like I said, some of the previews aren't even good at all, so I can totally get that. And I'm not saying, you have to take every word that they say by gospel. I'm just saying some of the repeating things that they said, and some things you can even notice by watching some of the preview videos that are up. You can tell some of these things that they said. But normally when things are a little bit more mixed like this, that doesn't normally indicate the game's going to get very high reviews. Now, for me, I could care less what this game gets as a review. If it gets a 6 as a review, I'm getting the game no matter what. I don't care if it gets a 9, if it gets a 10, if it gets a 3, right? It doesn't really matter to me. Now, ultimately, when I play it, if I think the same thing, then that's going to kind of be a problem, right? But that's an important note. Normally, and sometimes, yes, if previews are overwhelmingly positive, it's still possible the game is not perfect. It's not a perfect game. It's not going to get 10s across the board. But you do notice this thing. If you watch Saints Row previews just a couple months, it's the closest example or the nearest example. Saints Row, it seemed like all the preview people were dancing around issues. They didn't want to be too mean to it. They didn't want to call things out. But you could tell there were some significant problems with previewers with Saints Row. And then the game came out, right? I'm not saying this is the same thing because there's not nearly the same problems or the amount or the size of problems in Gotham Knights as there was for Saints Row. But you do notice maybe letting them off the hook a little bit, saying, well, if the game comes out and they put it all together, then it'll be good, right? When you hear quotes like that, okay, well, if they don't do it, then it's going to be an issue. Ultimately, though, this is kind of what I expected. There is good in this game. There's also maybe some significant flaws. It's kind of what we've been saying from the jump. This is not going to be a perfect game. I think this is a 7 or 8 out of 10 game, and I've been saying that for years, so that's what I think the review scores will end up being. So that's my thoughts on it based off of their thoughts on it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on so you know when all these videos go up. If you want to follow or support me anywhere else, all my social media links are in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.